What's going on, everybody? This is Al from PlaybookGamer.com, and today we're going to look at defense and special teams recruiting strategies. This is part of my NCAA Football 06 recruiting guide. Hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have an idea of how I like to recruit both defensive players and the schemes themselves with a little special teams thrown in. Before we get knee-deep into the video, I just wanted to point out that I'll have a bunch of links and timestamps in the description below for everything regarding this video, including, as you see here, this is my recruiting guide page on my website. You go to playbookgamer.com, go to start here, and there is the recruiting guide, and it just has a bunch of links, videos, charts, you name it. Everything is in one nice, convenient location. I'm going to make sure this video gets thrown in there along with the link to that page will definitely be below as well. Before we head back into the video, I just want to briefly mention my two big items I have on the site. First of all, my 128 megabyte PlayStation 2 memory card with over 20 named roster files for every PlayStation 2 NCAA football game. Now, it's got all of the default for that particular year for every single season for those games, and also have a handful of the 2021 rosters, specifically for 06 and 07 and 09 and 11. And if you need the free version of these files, there are below the card itself. This is for somebody who plays on the emulator or who has the ability to use like an Action Replay or Max Drive device. Now, the other big item I have, and that is the Vault. This is something brand new that I'm really excited about. This is my simplified way of providing full access to my entire file collection. It's all in one spot. All of my books, it has all of I got dynasty files I'm going to throw in there, game info spreadsheets, team playbooks, play images, my entire playbook collection, which there are hundreds of playbooks in there. I got dynasty trackers, I got a franchise tracker, I got some call sheets in there. And the biggest thing is, all of this is a one-time fee, lifetime access. Just an incredible deal. It's worth it for anybody who's really into this stuff like me. Here are some things we're going to look at today. We got defensive types. We're going to look at the 5 main defensive schemes in the game. We're going to look at attributes and ratings and kind of how they affect defensive players. We're also going to look at position breakdowns. We're going to go through every single defensive position, including our kickers. And we're also going to look at some position changes possibilities. Let's talk coaching strategy. When you're going in the dynasty mode and you go to coach strategy from the main menu, this is where you get to change up your philosophy and how you want to run your offense and your defense. And this is the main screen for that. And you notice this is base defense. This is where you get to pick from one of the 5 defensive schemes. You got the 4-3, the 4-4, the 3-4, the 3-3-5, and the 4-2-5. And everything below this line right here, it's all simulation stuff. You don't have to worry about that as long as you're playing the games yourself. Let's talk minimum roster requirements. You notice I got a big old chart here, and it shows every single defensive scheme, the 4-3, the 4-4, 3-4, 3-3-5, and 4-2-5. And over to the far left, I got each position, and at the bottom, I got a total. This is the minimum amount of players you need for each position to run your scheme. So if you're a 4-3 defensive guy, these are the minimum that you need. You got to have, for example, 4 defensive ends on your roster at all times, or the game is going to throw walk-ons onto your roster, which you don't want. Now, on the far left, we got the 4-3. This is your most basic defense in the game, and I don't have anything colored. It's pretty standard fare. Now, when you go to the 4-4, this is when you're going to start seeing a couple weird things that I want to point out. The first thing is, I'm really surprised, is the 4-4, it only requires you to have 1 free safety, and it's going to look really weird when we're going to look at the formation itself here in a little bit, but it's just a minimum of 1. I'm surprised by that. But they require you to have a minimum of 2 strong safeties, so kind of keep that in mind. Here's the 3-4. You only need a minimum of 3 defensive ends, which makes no sense because you got 2 defensive ends playing at all times, yet the game just says you only need 3 at the most. But that's whatever. Then you have 5 outside linebackers as a minimum for the 3-4, which again I thought was weird, which isn't a bad thing when we look at our special rule below. Then you got cornerbacks. They want you to have a minimum of 5 cornerbacks in your 3-4 defense, which is whatever, whatever. Then you got the 3-3-5. Then things get even more weird. They still want you to have just 3 defensive ends at the most, which I guess isn't a bad thing. You just need more of them. Corners, 5, no different than that 3-4. The free safety, they want you to have a minimum of 3 for whatever reason, even though you're only going to play 1 at a time at all times, but that's not a big deal. Then you got the 4-2-5, where it's not as goofy as the 3-3-5, but you still have 5 corners they want you to have, even though you'll really run 2 at the most throughout the entire time. And they want you to have a minimum of 3 free safeties. So I just kind of want to point that out to you when you pick your defensive scheme. Now, at the very bottom, I have the use the +1 rule when needed. You notice you only got a total of 23 kids that you technically need on defense. Well, the game gives you a maximum of 70 spots to fill. Well, 70 divided by 2 gives you 35. So you got like an extra dozen spots to fill for all of these. So if you're running the 4-3, just kind of get in your mind, I'm going to add +1. So I'm going to have 5, 5, 5, 4, 5, 3, and 3. Just something like that. You want to have cushion. You want to have some depth in your program. So kind of keep that in mind. Now, I did put the when needed part because of all these little green cells right here, all these numbers. I just thought that was just really weird. But again, just kind of keep this in mind whenever you pick your scheme. Let's look at each defensive type. Now, in the offensive video, I've done some very descriptive things about the type of schemes you can run, but it's a lot more simple with the defensive side of things in this game. And I'm only going to show you what the defensive formation looks like. It pretty much is self-explanatory, but we got the 4-3 defense. The 4-3, you got 4 down linemen. You got 2 defensive ends on the edge and 2 defensive tackles. That's how you get the 4. Then you got the 3 part. Those are your 3 linebackers. You got a middle linebacker with 2 outside linebackers on either side of him. Then you got 2 cornerbacks. Then you got a free safety and a strong safety. So that is the base 4-3. And over here on the right is the same information as what we saw on that minimum roster requirements page. Next up, we have the 4-4. Again, the first digit, that 4, those are your 4 defensive linemen, 2 defensive ends, and 2 defensive tackles. And then the second digit, the 4, is your 4 middle linebackers. We got 2 middle linebackers and 2 outside linebackers to make up the 4 total linebackers. Now, at base, by default, you have a free safety. That is what I thought was really weird. The game only says you only need a minimum of 1 free safety, but you got 1 starting at all times. I highly suggest you probably have 3 on your roster. But with sub packages, you could switch that and put a strong safety in there, and you weren't going to have any issues because the game wants you to have a minimum of 2 strong safeties. So you may get in the habit of rolling with a strong safety there. But then on the edge, you got 2 cornerbacks to make up the 4-4. Next up, we have the 3-4. We got 3 defensive linemen this time. Only 1 defensive tackle. That's going to be right on the center. And we got 2 defensive ends. Now we got 4 linebackers. No different than that 4-4. We got 2 middle linebackers and 2 outside linebackers. And then the back end is no different than that 4-3 defense. You got a free safety, you got a strong safety, and you got 2 corners on the edge. Now, again, this is the information from the minimum roster requirements page from earlier, and it says you only need a minimum of 3 defensive ends, but when you got 2 going at all times, at least have 4 to 5 on your roster. Outside linebackers, 5 is actually a good number. They just kind of overcompensated. I think what the game does is it feels like it's got to have a minimum of 23 somewhere, so they had to put those numbers at some spot. And the same with the cornerback. Depending on how you run the 3-4, what few times I've ran it, I didn't have to dive away too much from it. I kind of stuck with the 3-4 regardless of what I went up against. So I felt like 5 cornerbacks was a little too much, but the game requires you to have a minimum of 5, so just kind of keep that in mind and at least get to that point, but I don't think you'll have to go beyond 5. Next up, we have the 3-3-5. We got 3 defensive linemen. You got a defensive tackle with 2 defensive ends on the outside. And then your 3 linebackers is no different than the 4-3. You got 1 middle linebacker and 2 outside linebackers. And then this is where things get kind of weird. This is the 5 part. You got 5 defensive backs. You got 2 corners on the outside. You got 2 strong safeties. That's what makes the 3-3-5 a little bit different, or is the strong safeties. with one free safety. Now you go over here, again, the defensive end requirement, it's a little low. I suggest you have up to 4 to 5. Cornerbacks, this is a defense to where you should not have to get away from it too much, just because it's really meant to stop spread offenses. And even though the game tells you need a minimum of 5, so it's possible you may not go beyond the 3-3-5, yet you're going to have a bunch of cornerbacks just sitting in your roster that isn't going to do much, so you may need to sprinkle in some nickel or whatnot. I know, it's kind of up to you how you want to do that. But I also thought it was kind of weird. At minimum, it says you need 3 free safeties. That's actually a good bare minimum, I guess. But I think at the most you would ever need is 3, just because you're only going to play 1 free safety at a time. Now, the strong safety, I highly recommend you go up to 4, maybe even 5, because you got 2 strong safeties playing at all times. The last main defensive scheme in the game that you can recruit to is the 4-2-5. You got a 4 down line front. You got 2 defensive tackles with 2 defensive ends on the outside. Your 2 linebackers is 1 middle linebacker and 1 outside linebacker. If I'm not mistaken, I think by default the game likes to use the right outside linebacker here, but it doesn't matter. You can use the depth chart and switch out whoever you need right there. And then the back end is no different than the 3-3-5. You got 1 high free safety. You got 2 cornerbacks on either side, and you got 2 strong safeties. So again, keep that in mind. The game wants you to have a minimum of 5 corners and 3 free safeties. But in terms of the strong safeties, I highly recommend you probably at least go up to 4. But the rest of that's pretty standard fare. Here are 3 other formations in the game. There's not many, but I want to at least mention them. We got the nickel. This is a 4 down line formation. You got 2 defensive tackles, 2 defensive ends. This guy right here pretty much replaces an outside linebacker. This is a cornerback. So this is your number 3 corner. Technically, it's called the nickel back. That's why they call this position or formation the nickel. So kind of keep that in mind. I use this all the time in my 4-3 defense. Any 4 down line front, I'll use this quite a bit if I got the talent for that particular position. Then you got the dime. Really no different than the nickel, except you're subbing out an outside linebacker with another corner. So these 2 guys right here are cornerbacks by default, not outside linebackers, but cornerbacks. This is still your default middle linebacker. This goes really well if you got cornerbacks galore. If you got a ton of them, use them. Again, it's just a formation. And then you got the 5-2. The 5-2s are really weird, Duck. You got 3 defensive tackles, 2 defensive ends, a middle linebacker, and an outside linebacker. And then on the back end, it's no different than the 4-3, the nickel, or the dime. You got a free safety, strong safety with 2 corners. But you can't specifically recruit to any of these 3 formations. It'd be cool if you could, like the nickel. This is about as popular as it gets nowadays, just because of spread offenses and such. But you could still use the formation. Every single formation, defensive-wise, you will have at your disposal, regardless of which defense that you pick. But I at least wanted to point these out to you. This is the attributes and ratings information. Now, I show this in the offensive video, and it just shows you which attributes are linked to which rating. So when you're recruiting, you're going to see 40 time. You're not going to see the actual word speed technically. It's going to say 40 time, but 40 time means the speed rating. Field awareness means the awareness rating, and so on and so forth. Now, everything you see in green is what we're going to look at a lot today with our defensive players. And just keep in mind for tackle rating, the squat attribute, that particular attribute handles several different things, but specifically for defense, it affects the tackle rating, which is a very important rating. And at the very bottom, we got some special teams information, which is very self-explanatory. It's for kickers and punters. It's literally kick power means kick power. Kick accuracy means kick accuracy in terms of the ratings. Over on my recruiting page, I have a ratings conversion chart that's been on the internet for years. I didn't make up the chart, somebody else did, where somebody went in and they was able to figure out that, hey, a 90 rating for a speed means it's a 4.35 on the 40 time, and so on and so forth. Now, this particular screen here just gives you like the base generic information. I just had to pick a few ratings like 99, 90, 80, just kind of gives you something to work off of, and this gives you an idea where some of these are at. So if you ever come across, for example, a linebacker that has 705 on the squat, that means he should have a 90 tackle rating, which is pretty strong. But again, go to the recruiting page. I'll have that there, and there's a lot more detailed information there compared to what you see here. Now let's talk about specific positions. Now, normally I would try to talk about each specific scheme and what you need for each specific position, but a lot of these blend in together because, again, we only got 5 defensive schemes to pick from, and there's only a handful of type of players that you really need. So it's pretty simplistic on the defensive side of things compared to offense. But we're going to start off with the defensive ends. Now, here we are in in-season recruiting. Now, before you actually recruit anybody, you have to select up to 12 players to recruit from. The problem is you can't look at anything else beyond what you see here. It only gives you the names of the player, the position. It gives you 40 time information. It gives you bench press. It gives you a squat information. And it gives you field awareness. But that's it. There's not much else you can work off of. Well, the good news is that's all you need for defensive players. That's one of a bit of an advantage on the defensive side compared to offense. When it comes to defensive ends, everything you see in a yellow box is good to go in terms of information you can look for and work off of. I always like to look at height and weight for a lot of these players because height and weight matters in this game. But when it comes to defensive ends, 40 time, bench, squat, and field awareness, every bit of this is important. So make sure you are aware of that when it comes to defensive ends. Let's look at some examples of some defensive ends. Now, a lot of people are sticklers for this right here, the tendency. I'm going to show each type of tendency player for each position, but I'm telling you it's not super important, but it's there, but at least I wanted to present it. Now, again, everything you see in a yellow box, I think this is what you need to pay attention to. So this is our first defensive end, Reginald Johnson, 6'3", 232 pounds. This is the type of defensive end that I would run with a 4-3 defense or a 4-down line where you don't need a whole lot of weight at defensive end. You want those guys to get off the edge and go after quarterbacks. And this is pretty typical for a natural defensive end. Now, this guy is a rare breed. Now, I haven't scouted the guy, so some of these numbers may not be correct, but let's pretend that they are. His 40 times is insane. That's super rare to find a defensive end that quick. Awareness, pay attention to it. It's important. It helps to have smart players. But it's the bench and squat. How strong is he? Can he push people around? That type of thing. Always look for the higher number, the better. Now, again, this is a natural defensive end. I normally am not the biggest fan of going after natural defensive ends and those 4-down fronts because linebackers tend to be a whole lot bigger and stronger. That's just something to keep in mind. Here is a defensive end that's a little bit different. Notice how big this dude is, 6'7", 268 pounds. Yes, look at your 40 time, your awareness, just kind of depends. But when it comes to like those 3-down fronts, the 3-4 and the 3-3-5, I want my defensive ends to be humongous individuals. These guys aren't really meant to rush the passer. They're meant to stop the run and let those safeties and linebackers do all the pass rushing. Now, again, look at this tendency. He is considered a pass rusher. It makes no sense that he is that way. And again, just don't focus too much on the tendency. Focus on what I got here in yellow. Focus on that. Try to find the biggest, strongest dude you can find if this is the type of defensive end that you need for a 3-4. And that is actually kind of small, in my opinion. I actually kind of want those guys like 280 pounds plus. But this is just an example of what a bigger defensive end may look like that could at least fit your odd front scheme. This defensive end is a little more like it. He's a little bit heavier. He's not very fast, but I don't need him to be in my odd front defense, like a 3-4, 3-3-5. I just need somebody who is humongous. I practically need a defensive tackle, more or less. But as long as he's got plenty of size and he's strong enough, a squat 665 is actually pretty good for a natural defensive end. This is an ideal 3-4/3-3-5 defensive end for me. Next up, we got defensive tackles. Now, this is an interesting position. I wish there was more variance in terms of how big these guys are, but that's neither here nor there. We can always work around it. As usual, no different than the defensive ends. I like to look at the height and the weight when you're in season recruiting. 40-time bench squat field awareness. Every bit of this is here for you. You're not missing out on any information, which is a good thing. So I got more than I need right here to decide what type of defensive tackle I need in in-season recruiting. This defensive tackle is my prototypical guy that I like to have. I don't care what type of defense I'm running. In this game, defensive tackles aren't built like they are in today's college football where you got several 340-pound type dudes. There's just not many that you're going to find that are over 300 pounds. So keep that in mind. Anytime you find somebody that's super tall, that's over 300 pounds, that's great. But you have to have somebody like this for like an odd front defense, for a 3-4 or a 3-3-5. You can put them in your 4-3-2. That's fine. But I just wanted to point out, if you only have one defensive tackle playing at all times, you better hope that he is humongous. Again, I recommend you can look at the 40 time if you need to, the awareness. The biggest thing is the bench and the squat. This is humongous. You need these guys to be as strong as possible. But this is just a good look at defensive tackle. I would take him any day of the week. Here is a defensive tackle that looks pretty standard from what I see for the most part. He's a little under 300 pounds. He's got some height to him, which is pretty good. But this looks like a standard 4-3, 4-2-5, 4-4 defensive tackle. And biggest thing is bench and squat. Yes, you can look at 40 time. That's not that big of a deal. The awareness, it helps have some smart players. But it's down here. Find somebody who's as strong as possible, who is as big as possible. Again, regardless of what defense you call, this is the type of guy that you really need, especially if you can find somebody that's even bigger than this guy right here. But I would take this guy in a heartbeat. He would be fit perfectly in a 4-3 defense. I want to show another example of a defensive tackle. This is another pass rusher, which I thought was really odd. There's very few tendency pass rusher defensive tackle. So again, just you don't have to worry about that. But look how undersized he is. I'm almost hesitant to go after the guy just because he is just so lightweight. And he doesn't look all that super strong either, even though he's considered like a 5-star guy. But look at his speed. He's got a 4.69. I guess he's considered a pass rushing defensive tackle. It doesn't matter. Biggest thing, look at the height, look at the weight, bench and squat especially, and all this other stuff up here is icing on the cake. Let's talk outside linebackers. Outside linebackers more than less have the same responsibility regardless of what defense you're calling. You got them going out in coverage, you got them blitzing, you got them doing a little bit of everything. And again, defensive ends, defensive tackles, outside linebackers, it doesn't matter. All of this stuff on the in-season recruiting screen is available to you. You got every information that you need here to make a decision on which outside linebackers you need. Height, weight, 40-time bench, squat, field awareness. All of this is here, which is a good thing. I had to start off with this guy right here. This is an abnormal outside linebacker. Most outside linebackers are a little smaller than the middle linebackers, but I had to point this guy out. 6'5", 234 pounds. That's a really big dude. Look at his 40 time, 4.37. Just super quick, super smart. And he's got some decent strength to him as well. This guy can do whatever you need him to be in any defense you call. So if you can come across somebody like this, by all means, go after him. But I really love his size and speed. Every bit of that looks really good. Now, this guy is considered a balanced tendency, but again, don't pay too much attention to that. The other guy, I think, was a run stopper. It doesn't matter. Focus on the numbers. Look at the height. Look at the weight. This kid right here, he's undersized. This is actually more natural of an outside linebacker that you're going to see for the most part. But look at this guy. He runs a 4.24. Now, he's just a 2-star kid, probably because he's not very smart and his bench and squat isn't very good. But again, I just want you to pay attention to everything you see in yellow. Focus on that and try to find the best guys who's got those best numbers to what you're looking for. Let's look at middle linebackers. It's no different than the outside linebackers. When it comes to in-season recruiting, focus on the height. You look at the weight. You look at the 40 time, the bench, squat, field awareness. Everything you need to know about that player to make a decision is all right here for you, which is great. Let's look at our first example of a middle linebacker. It's considered a balanced middle linebacker, but don't worry about that. Again, focus on the numbers. Height and weight. Look at this mamma jamma. 6'5", 244 pounds. And he runs a 4.46, A- on the awareness. His squat is really good. That means he's got a pretty good tackle rating. This is the type of guy that I like to use to move down to defensive end. We're going to look at the position changes a little bit later, but this guy is a future defensive end written all over it if you need him. He could play middle linebacker for you for 4 years if you need him to. But this guy is very diverse. I would use him in a lot of different areas, but mainly middle linebacker, defensive end. This guy just screams All-American to me. Here we have a middle linebacker that's considered a coverage guy, I guess because he's so small. Again, just focus on the numbers. Yes, he is small, but he's super quick. If you need somebody, it just depends on how you run your defense. If you got a middle linebacker that's not going to blitz a whole lot, or if he does, if you just need him to run around all over the place, maybe this is the type of middle linebacker you need. But as small as he is, you're going to keep him at middle linebacker. But again, focus on the bench, the squat, his strength, and his smart and how fast he is. Let's look at cornerbacks. Again, no different. Every bit of this information is important to you. Height, weight, 40, bench, squat, and field awareness. Everything is here for me to make a decision on what type of cornerback I need, especially the height, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. The first guy I want to look at is this guy right here, Jesse Dunlap. He's considered a coverage guy, but again, numbers. 6'4", 175 pounds. I'm going to go ahead and say this now. Cornerbacks, strong safeties, free safeties, height is super important to me. Everybody knows in 06, the deep ball it can be effective at times. It helps to have a secondary that's really tall that can go up and swat things down, get interceptions and such. So this guy is like the ideal cornerback for me. He's just really tall. Look how fast he is. It runs a 4.16. He's smart. That's nice. I also like to look at the vertical jump when it comes to the secondary players. Because, again, if he could jump really high, that's just 1 inch closer for him to swatting down one of those deep balls. Hands, I went ahead and circled that just because it's nice if he can get an interception or two. Also, when it comes to quarterbacks, sometimes they can play a little wide receiver. I don't want to dive too much into that. But that's like the least important of all these right here. But it's not a bad trait to have. I would focus more on the other things. Bench and squat, yeah. If it helps if he's strong, that means he doesn't get pushed off the line too much with the wide receivers. But the biggest thing I'd focus on the corner is height and speed and awareness and a little bit of vertical. Here's another example of a cornerback that fits kind of what I like, even though he's considered a balance. He's not as tall as the other guy, but at 6'1" is still tall enough. But again, he's very fast, he's very smart, and he can jump halfway decent too. That's enough for me to say, yeah, I'm going to go after him. Plus that 4.22, you can use that for something else, maybe in special teams or whatnot. But this is another good-looking cornerback prospect. I wanted to point this cornerback out. I found when I was going through recruiting, he was the only one that was considered a hard hitter. Why he's listed as such, I don't know. I don't know if it's just because of his strength. Either way, focus on the height, focus on the weight. He's not very fast. I recommend you get some speed at cornerback. And he's not the smartest guy in the world, but his jump is really good. So just kind of keep all of that in mind when it comes to quarterbacks. Just get some height, get you some speed, and I think you're going to be okay. Let's talk free safeties. It's really no different than the cornerback position. It's no different than the strong safety position, honestly. Because the secondary, they all kind of do the same thing regardless of what defense you call. Now, when it comes to free safety, in-season recruiting, like every other position we've talked about, height, weight, 40, bench, squat, field awareness, all of this is important. This will give you enough information to make a decision on the type of free safety that you need. This kid right here is like a prototypical free safety that I would go after. No different than the corner. I like to have somebody who's super tall. I like to have somebody who's super fast. It helps that he's smart too, and he's got a good vertical jump. This guy just screams, just All-American, even though he's like a 3-star kid. So don't just go by ratings alone. But again, think about what a free safety is doing. He's on the back end. He's trying to chase down those deep balls if needed. You need somebody who can fly down the field as quickly as possible, who could jump pretty high, who could swat things down, and who could make plays for you. This guy right here is just an ideal fit for what I would do regardless of scheme. This guy is considered a coverage free safety. Again, don't pay much attention to that. Just pay attention to the numbers, height, weight. I would probably get somebody a little bit bigger than that, but I know sometimes you can't always do that. His speed is fine. He's a 3-star kid. This guy looks great for somebody in like the MAC conference, just a group of 5 team. He would work really well there. field awareness, all that looks pretty good. He's got good hands. Whether he'll ever catch an interception, who knows? His squat's actually pretty strong. But again, just focus on the numbers and try to get the best that you can find. Next up, we got strong safeties. It just depends on how you run your defense. Like in my 4-3 defense, my strong safeties and my free safeties pretty much have the same responsibilities, but everybody runs their defenses differently. That's why I can't cover every little scenario. But just like every position we've talked about, height, weight, 40, bench, squat, field awareness, all of this is important. It's all here for you to make a decision on what type of strong safety that you need. I had to point out this dude right here. 6'7", 210 pounds. Now, this is odd. Do not expect to find a bunch of these guys just hanging around. But somebody that big, he can almost play like outside linebacker if you need him to. But somebody who runs a 4.37 that's that tall, he just screams Ed Reed. Now, I know Ed Reed is not 6'7". I'm just saying this guy could be just an absolute stud, strong safety for you just because he's so abnormal. Either way, I always like to have some height and strong safety. I like to have some speed because, again, like in my defenses, a lot of times my strong safeties do the same thing as my free safeties. Now, if you're running a defense like a 3-3-5 or a 4-2-5, you may not need that. It just kind of depends. You know, if you're running one of those two particular defenses, you're going to have strong safeties pretty much act like outside linebackers. So this may be what you need. Everybody's different when it comes to this stuff. Either way, just look at the numbers and just try to find the best one that you can find. This guy right here looks more prototypical to what I see for most of the strong safeties. Now, he's just a 2-star kid, but again, just focus on height and weight, speed, yes. Try to find a smart dude and somebody who could jump a little bit. That would be great as well. Here is what the game considers a hard hitter. Why? I don't know if it's because his squat is so good, but don't expect to see a bunch of hard hitters out there. Again, don't pay attention to that. Just pay attention to the numbers. Look at the height. You look at the weight. If you need a really, not so much a hard hitter, but if you need a strong safety that's going to be around the offensive line a whole lot, the line of scrimmage, maybe you want somebody who's a little stronger, who can make those tackles a little bit better. Because you got to remember the squat rating the squat attribute directly ties to the tackle rating. So if you need great tackles or guys who can tackle well, go for the squat rating across the board, no matter what. Other than that, I recommend you find a strong safety that's a little faster than this guy right here. Yes, he's a 2-star, but still, kind of keep that in mind. The next thing I want to look at are athletes. Now, in the offseason, you get to recruit athletes. These are guys who can play a little bit of everything. You don't know what positions they're good at until you get them on your campus, and you can move them around a little bit. But let's look at this guy for an example. Gary Hardy, 5'11", 200 pounds. Now, it gives us a bunch of information here. This looks a whole lot like a secondary player. More than likely, he could play maybe a little corner, maybe because he's fast. I don't know. Can he play free safety? It's possible. He can maybe play strong safety. You just don't know. But what I do know is that he's super fast. He could probably play somewhere. A- hands, does that mean he is an offensive guy? You have no clue until you get him on campus. I would still take a chance on him. I mean, by the way, he's a 5-star kid. I'm sure he'll play somewhere. But just kind of keep that in mind. He still looks like a guy who could play on either side of the ball, but you just never know. Let's look at this guy right here, Brian Wood, 6'4", 171. That looks very close to that free safety we saw earlier. But does that mean he could play free safety? We don't know until you get him on campus. Either way, I do know he's tall. I know he's super fast. He's got an incredible vertical. So this guy is just an absolute freak athlete. He's a 4-star kid. He's got A+ hands. Does that mean he's a wide receiver? He looks like a great wide receiver, but maybe he could play free safety or maybe he could play corner. You don't know until you get him on campus, but I always recommend you go after as many athletes as possible because you just never know. Let's look at this example. Chauncey Hollis, 6'4", 291 pounds. You're going to come across athletes that look like linemen, either offense or defensive linemen. At least we know he's humongous. So does this mean he could be a good defensive tackle? He could maybe be a defensive end in your 3-3-4 or 3-3-5 or 3-4. Who knows? I would take a chance on him, of course. He's a 4-star kid. Very good chance he'll probably be playing on the defensive side, but he may be a great left guard. Who knows? I'd still take a chance, but at least this gives you an idea of what an athlete may look like if you're looking for a defensive lineman. I had to show you this particular athlete. Look at this guy, 6'7", 327 pounds. Just an absolute load. He looks like one of two things, either a tackle on offense or a defensive tackle. You don't know until you get him on campus, but as big as he is, this guy would be like the ideal 3-4 defensive tackle for me. If he could play that, you don't know until you get him in there and start switching around on the position side of things. But he's got a 690 squat. He seems pretty smart, but just he's so huge. I can't stress enough how important height and weight is in this game. But at least this gives you an example of what a potential, at least a 3-4 defensive tackle may look like. Hey, there's nothing stopping you from running a 4-3 with this guy. He could play one of the defensive tackles in that defense as well. Let's briefly talk about kickers and punters. It's very self-explanatory. Now, here we have a kicker. Yes, I have highlighted that you can look at the height and weight. I always just find it interesting to find somebody that's really abnormally huge or just weird looking. But that's not super important compared to this down here. Kick power and kick accuracy. It's very self-explanatory. You want to try to find the best you can. This guy's got a pretty good leg. I would recruit him in a heartbeat. Here we have a kicker that's considered sporadic, probably because his accuracy isn't all that great. It still doesn't matter. I still suggest you scout the guy. You don't know how good this is going to be. Still look at kick power and accuracy. That's all that really matters when it comes to a kicker. Punters are no different. Here's a balanced punter. Again, I always like to look at height and weight because I just think it's fun to have goofy-looking players on my team. But look at this guy's kick power and accuracy. A+ and A. This guy has just got a prototypical All-American punter written all over him. I'd recruit him in a heartbeat. Here is another punter. It's considered sporadic, and I guess it's because of the accuracy isn't all that great. I still recommend you scout him to get the accurate reading. But again, focus on kick power and accuracy, and it'll tell you exactly how good of a leg he's got. Let's talk position changes. Now, there's a handful of things you could do on the defensive side. We'll start off with the very first one. This is the most popular one. A linebacker moving the defensive end. I talked about this a handful of times in the video already. Anytime I come across a linebacker that's pretty big, about 6'2" or a little over 230 pounds, I can see him being a future defensive end in a 4-3 defense or a 4-4, four-down line type defense. For a 3-3-5 or a 3-4, you don't need that. But if you need an edge rusher at defensive end, I typically like to get bigger linebackers and move them down because they're usually faster and stronger than a natural defensive end. I'm telling you when I say this, defensive ends in this game aren't built all that great except for like a handful. So keep that in mind. If you're going to run a 4-3 defense, I highly recommend you think ahead a year and think about linebackers who are much bigger and are also going to be much stronger than those natural defensive ends. Next up, we got one that I've rarely got to work, but I at least wanted to mention it. A defensive end, a defensive tackle, must be huge defensive ends and only if needed. This is when it comes to a point where, say you're taking over a team that ran the 3-4. You got a humongous defensive ends, but they're not good in your new 4-3, and you need to move them over. I think you could be okay if you moved a defensive end over the defensive tackle if he's like 290 pounds. Then all of a sudden he looks like a natural defensive tackle in your 4-3. So that's just something to think about, but only if you need to. Again, a lot of this is just predicated on if you're short on players. Next up, we got strong safety to outside linebacker. I've made this work a couple times, but this is only when I did not have enough outside linebackers to begin with. I would have a spare strong safety. I can move him down, and especially if I just needed some more speed. I highly suggest you keep your expectations low, though, because don't expect this guy to become a world beater all of a sudden once you move him down there, just in terms of like his ratings and such. The next thing I want to talk about is free safety, the strong safety, the cornerback. The whole secondary is a bit of a mess. I've tried this. None of these guys move over well from one to the other. And I've talked about this a couple times already. A lot of times in my 4-3 defense, my strong safety and my free safety, they pretty much have the same responsibilities. So I'd like for them to be able to do the same thing. The problem is the game is just not going to let me move a strong safety over to free safety and it all will just be well. His awareness goes kaput. It's just all kinds of bad. So I highly recommend you don't really fool with this a whole lot. Test it if you want to. Just keep your expectations low. Another position change I want to mention, I've rarely had to do it, and again, it's only for desperation, is if I just ran out of cornerbacks altogether, you may have a spare wide receiver that could move over the corner. They usually have enough speed to at least keep up with people. The problem is their awareness is going to be awful. So kind of keep that in mind. Now, here are a few tips. The biggest one is only move players after their freshman/first year. So when you get a brand new middle linebacker, true freshman, do not move him to defensive end right then and there. You got to wait a year for that to take effect. That's just the way the game is set up. Just let him sit a year, redshirt him, or play him, do whatever you got to do. But if you plan on moving him to defensive end, wait till the second year. Then you got tip number 2. Save your dynasty file before changing any positions. Test this stuff out. If it works out great, awesome. Save it. If not, go back and tinker with it some more. And tip number 3, depth chart moves are usually better than actual position changes. It just depends if you're desperate for a spot. What we're trying to avoid is walk-ons coming to our program. You can't drop a walk-on. I wish you could, but the game won't let you. Try to fill your minimum roster requirements. So just make sure that all your depth chart everything is set up before you do anything drastic right here. Because the biggest thing is this linebacker, the defensive end. That's the number one you're going to use more than the rest of these, and maybe the strong safety, the outside linebacker. But again, a lot of this is based off of, I'm literally down an outside linebacker. I got to move somebody. Well, at least this gives you a couple of options. Okay, I think I've covered everything. I wish I could have covered every little scenario, like here are all the little things for the 4-3, the 4-2. You can't do that because there's just too many scenarios to work off of. I could talk to somebody else and they can have a completely different strategy for their 4-3 and how they want to handle their strong safeties and such. But at least what we've done, we was able to go over all the defensive types, the 5 main ones you could pick from. We got to go through all of the ratings and kind of how each one are affected to or connected with attributes. We went through every single position, kind of what I like to look at, what they look like in the game, and then we got to look at a handful of position changes possibilities. All right, hopefully this was useful to you. Make good use of it, and I'll talk to you later.